Hey guys, it's Faye from Solar Flow, and I am back with an all-new video. Today's topic is a deep dive behind the veil energy read onto a serial killer by the name of Ed Kemper. So if that sounds good to you, please stick around, and if not, I will catch you at another video. Now, before we get into the energy read on him, before we get into even the 3D exploration of what he had done and why we're even talking about him, I'm actually going to do something very different. And I'm going to start with 2% personal opinion, which is to say that even if you yourself think that this video or this topic will be of no interest to you, I'm really going to encourage you guys to watch this video all the way through. Because personally, I find Ed Kemper to be fascinating, both in his energy as well as what he had done in the 3D and what the big takeaway in looking into him is. So again, guys, I'm really going to encourage you to watch this video all the way through. Now, in addition to that, I'm also going to say that Ed Kemper is not somebody that I have recently come to know about. So he is not somebody that you guys have requested I look into for an AMA. Now, I first came to know about Ed Kemper, I would say roughly about 20 years ago. And, you know, he hasn't really been in my periphery all that much until very recently. So what brought him back into my periphery? So I don't watch TV. So the only way in which I actually like to consume information is by viewing YouTube videos. And sometimes, if none of the content creators I myself enjoy watching have come out with a new video or anything that is of interest to me, I'll actually go back and watch my own older videos. So this is actually how Ed's energy had come in. One night last week, I was rewatching the video that I had done on Ted Bundy. Incredible and very insightful. If you yourself have not seen it, I have linked it down below if you would like to go back and view it. But I was watching the video that I had done on Ted Bundy, and Ed Kemper's energy came in fast and hard. And when somebody's energy comes into me, and I don't actually have to go looking into it, if I'm rather invited in, I stop what I am doing and I go tend to that person's invitation. So I stopped the video on Ted Bundy. I went to go sit to meditate, and the energy was like, it's coming in now. So I stopped attempting to meditate. I took out my notebook, I took out my pen, and I allowed myself to be the vessel in which the information had passed through, and allowed myself to be, as I affectionately refer to myself, the hand that holds the pen of the channeled information. And in this case, this is not so much channeled as it was an invitation by Ed for him to share with me and through me things that were of relevance for him to share. And again, I found it to be absolutely insightful. I find his energy to be incredibly insightful. He has a rare ability to actually see himself clearly, not necessarily in a veiled capacity, but in a very unique and different kind of capacity. So I'm really excited to share this information with you, and I would be delighted if at the end or any point while you're viewing the video for you to share how you are finding the information. And with that in mind, let's dive in. So first and foremost, in case you have not yet, if you are not familiar with who Ed Kemper is, I have gone through his Wikipedia page just last night to become better acquainted myself with who he is and what he had done. Because again, I remind you, I first came to learn about him well over 20 years ago. So I didn't remember everything that he had done. I had only remembered, like, let's say one or two really, really notable things. So I did a refresher just last night where I went to his Wikipedia page. And for any of the Agent Smiths out there, I'm just gonna start off by saying, first of all, real life over here. Garbage trucks, it's garbage day. But I'm going to first and foremost start off by saying that this is not the full breadth and scope of what is on Ed Kemper's Wikipedia page. Because here's the thing, guys. I'm not Wikipedia. I'm an energy reader. And anybody that is here wanting to view my videos are here for the behind the veil, channeled information that comes in. So if anybody wants to read about Ed Kemper in your own free time, I have shared his Wikipedia page down below. You are welcome to read about him. I've only picked through the most notable things about him that I am choosing to share with you guys. Now, lastly, I'm also just going to state, while I try to kill time before the garbage truck drives away, I'm also going to state that some of the 3D information on Ed Kemper and what he had done is a bit gnarly. So I'm going to do the best I can to share it with you while also sanitizing it as best I can so that it's not as gnarly as it could potentially be. But again, if you want to come to understand everything that he has done, Wikipedia does not hold back. Again, his wiki page is linked down below if you yourself want to immerse yourself in the fullness of it. But again, I warn you, it's a bit gnarly. All right, so let's dive in and let's first see what Ed Kemper's Wikipedia page had revealed to me. So Edmund Kemper is an American serial killer convicted of unaliving, and I'm going to speak in code because I want to keep the channel in good standing. So I'm not going to be using a lot of the more clinical terms to discuss somebody. I'm going to be using the sanitized versions. And when I say somebody has unalived somebody, it's not to say that that person had crossed over, as in croaked, through natural causes. It's where they were taken off the earth plane at the hands of another. Not their own hands, not natural causes, not accidents, through the hands of another. So Edmund Kemper is an American serial killer convicted of unaliving 7 women and 1 girl over a year-long period in the 1970s. Now, one of the things that makes Edmund Kemper such a interesting character to look into is who the people that he had actually unalived. So I'm going to first start by sharing that at the age of 15 years old, Kemper had unalived his paternal grandparents. So his first 2 victims were his father's mother and his father's father. That was at 15. Now, later on in life, who were his other victims? He had unalived 5 college students, which earned him the nickname the co-ed unaliver. He had also unalived 1 high school student, as well as his mother and his mother's best friend. But oh wait, there's more. So much more. Now, the co-eds that he had unalived, he had picked up while they were hitchhiking. And although he had unalived 5 of them, he had estimated that he had given safe passage to approximately 150 other co-eds. Now that's notable. And what had precipitated his desire to unalive the 5 that he had unalived was they had happened at the heels of having a extreme argument with his mother. His mother was an incredibly low vibe person, and his mother had been incredibly critical of both Ed's father as well as Ed himself. So his mother was in fact a huge, on a strictly 3D level, his mother was a huge motivating factor in what had driven him to make the choice to unalive women. Now, in addition to that, most of the unalived victims, what had been done to them posthumously was necrophilia, and that is where a person engages in sexual activities with a deceased body, as well as decapitation and dismemberment. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on as well, but again, really not going to be going into too much details because it's gnarly. Now, early on in Ed's life, he had exhibited antisocial behavior. And after he had been detained and taken into custody after he had unalived his grandparents, his IQ was tested. And early on, his IQ at 15 years old was 136. However, later on, it was again tested, and he had an IQ of 145. These are incredibly high numbers. This is not a stupid person. Ed Kemper is actually incredibly bright and incredibly brilliant. Again, at least on a strictly three-dimensional level. Now, during his time being incarcerated, after he was convicted for unaliving his grandparents, he was a model prisoner, so much so that he was trained to administer psychiatric tests to the other inmates. And a psychiatrist later said about Ed, quote, "He was a very good worker, and this is not typical of a sociopath. He really took pride in his work," end quote. Now, let's talk a little bit about what a sociopath is, because a lot of the three-dimensional information on Ed is pertaining to mental, I guess we could call it mental health. So what is a sociopath, and what is somebody that exhibits antisocial behavior? So a sociopath is a mental disorder characterized by a disregard for other people, wherein the person tends to lie, break the law, act impulsively, and lack regard and safety for themselves as well as others. In extreme cases, very extreme cases, it can manifest in somebody unaliving another. That's not always the case, though. It's not to say that if somebody is not unaliving and they're a sociopath, it doesn't have very, very grave consequences for them and for their family members. It absolutely does. Now, when he had been incarcerated as a 15-year-old, he was first diagnosed as, I think, having paranoid schizophrenia, but then later that he was re-diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, as well as schizotypal personality disorder. Now, again, antisocial is this aforementioned mental disorder characterized by a disregard for other people. Narcissism can also be closely tied to it, because a lot of narcissists lack a complete lack of empathy, which can show up as them having a lack of regard for other people. Now, in case this term schizotypal personality disorder is foreign to you, that is where the person exhibits an extreme level of uncomfortability in interpersonal relationships with other people. So it's really a person that has a lot of difficulty and a lot of trouble relating to other people. Let's see what else I can share with you that I had acquired through looking at his Wikipedia page. Now, after being released as a minor, so again, he was arrested at 15 for unaliving his grandparents. He was later released at, I believe, 20 or 21 years old, and his record for having unalived his grandparents was expunged. meaning that if he was ever pulled over or if he was ever arrested, that would be something that would not even come up. And again, this is due to the fact that he was considered to be such a model prisoner that they had believed he had made incredible strides in integrating what he had learned, in why he had done this, and then successfully moving forward in his life. However, as we come to understand, this is not in fact so, because later on, he went on to commit additional unalivings of other people. Now, again, this is where I'm going to bring our attention back to why he had chosen to unalive the co-eds. So his victims were all women, and they had all been following a dispute that he had had with his mother. And he had unalived his mother. And what he had actually done after unaliving her was he decapitated her. He put her head on a shelf and he proceeded to yell at her for over an hour. So he basically got to purge a lot of the pent-up energy and the pent-up things that he had never had the ability to say to her when she was alive. So he got to expel a lot of that energy directed towards her. And then after he had yelled at her, he had taken, I'm not laughing because it's funny, I'm laughing because it's like, again, like beyond. He had taken darts, again, I'm not laughing because it's funny, and he had thrown darts at her decapitated head. Then he had pulled out her vocal cords and her larynx, and he put it down the incinerator because he wanted to pulverize it. And it was not able to be pulverized, so the sink had spit it back out, and he had thought that that was poetic justice because when she was alive, she had never shut up towards him. So it was for him even fitting that being unalived, it was like the energy continued to stay with him. Now, after he had unalived his mom, he had invited his mom's best friend over to watch a movie, and then he had unalived her as well. Then he got in his car. He drove through the night from California to Colorado. He called the police to turn himself in. He was not believed, and the police said, call back later. So he had called back later, and he had specifically requested to speak to a police officer that he knew. And then he had confessed to that police officer, and he stayed put so they could come and they could apprehend him. Now, in case you're wondering, why was there a police officer that he had known? And that is because following his release from being incarcerated for unaliving his grandparents, Ed had taken the police test because he actually wanted to be a police officer. And he was not accepted due to his height. Because Ed Kemper was 6'9" tall. He was almost 7 feet tall. And when he was 4 years old, he stood a complete head above all of his other classmates. So he was not accepted due to his incredibly tall height, but he did maintain a very friendly relationship with the local police department. So that is why when he called to turn himself in, he had requested a police officer he had known. Interesting. Now, in addition to that, after he had been apprehended in Colorado and taken back to California, he was found to be legally sane, as well as guilty on all counts that was brought against him. Now, he had requested the death penalty, but the death penalty was not something that was currently available in California at that time, so he was given 8 life sentences. Now, while he was incarcerated, he is still alive. He's 75 years old now. But while incarcerated, he has remained in general population and was considered to be a model prisoner. And because of that, he scheduled other inmates' psychiatric appointments, and he was a prolific audiobook narrator, and he had logged 5,000 hours narrating various books. He also was he also donated his time to a charity in which he was preparing material for blind students. Again, I find this all to be very interesting and insightful into who he is, because it's like, but look at his crimes, and then it's like, but look at how he actually showed up after he's been incarcerated. Now, while he was imprisoned, he also did a number of TV interviews, as well as interviews with an FBI profiler by the name of John Douglas. Now, John Douglas has written a number of books and kind of like outlining what it was like for him to be an FBI profiler. And he had also described Ed Kemper as, quote, among the brightest prison inmates that he had interviewed and capable of rare insight for a violent criminal, end quote. He also added that he, John Douglas, personally liked Ed Kemper, and he referred to him as a friendly, open, and sensitive person with a great sense of humor. When Ed Kemper was later asked why he chose to speak so candidly in both TV interviews as well as interviews that he had done with the FBI, he stated that he had been forthcoming about the crimes so that he could save others like himself from unaliving people and committing similar types of crimes. And he had also encouraged people, if anyone was watching these TV interviews, to not act on their impulses. Talk to somebody about the impulses, because thinking about it is not a crime, talking about it is not a crime, but once one were to actually, in fact, commit the crimes, that's when they became a crime. And he had also shared that once you start them, it's incredibly hard to stop committing the crimes. So again, all of this lends itself to him being a really unique individual in which it appears as if he does in fact show some level of compassion, if not for the people that he himself had unalived, but a level of compassion for other people that are in a similar situation. Now, I'm also just going to share with you that after Ed had unalived his grandmother, he had gone outside to unalive his grandfather as well. So he had taken one of those things that you pow-pow with. He had unalived his grandmother with a pow-pow device. And then he had gone outside to where his grandfather was coming home, and he had unalived his grandfather. And when asked why he had done that, he had shared that he didn't want his grandfather coming in and finding that he had unalived his grandmother. So when I was first reading that, I was like, well, this is interesting. This actually appears to be showing a level of compassion for his grandfather coming in and discovering that his wife had been unalived. No, I continue to actually, in fact, read, and what Ed had then shared was he knew that if his grandfather had come inside and had seen what he had done to his grandmother, his grandfather would have been rather cross with him. So again, Ed is somebody that is really kind of like full of these contradictions. Now, he has been eligible for parole a bunch of times, and I didn't even write down all of the years that he was eligible for parole, but it's been at least 10 different and distinct times. Now, this should probably come as no surprise to anybody. He has not been paroled, and he is still, in fact, incarcerated. But when he had been asked about being eligible for parole and then not receiving it, Ed had shared that he does not fault the parole board for not paroling him. So this is, again, a person that has a level of insight and understanding into, if not himself, even though he has incredible insight into himself, does in fact have a lot of insight into the way that society functions and works as a whole. So now that we have gone through a boatload of 3D information on Ed, let's now dive into the energy read on him. Okay. So the very, very first thing that I wrote down once I had started to receive Ed's energy is, this is truly a wild one. Just one of the many reasons I encourage you guys to watch this video. Ed Kemper's energy is truly a wild one, because his energy came in fast and hard and left equally fast. Now, Ed's energy, when it had come into me, is not a talkative one. In fact, he chose to do almost no talking, at least early on. What he had done instead was he chose to allow me to see and experience things as he did. So this is not an energy read that was conversationally heavy. Because some people, when I connect to their energy, they want to talk to me. They want to share things with me. Not Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper wanted to share with me, but not verbally. He had literally granted me access into his mind, so that way it was as if, let's say he was driving a car and I was in the car with him and I was a passenger in the car, but I was sitting in like the front passenger seat. So I was not in control of the vehicle. I was not in control of the things that he was sharing with me, but I got a front row seat to experience it as he had experienced it. And I got to see these things that he chose to share with me through a level of detachment. And that is because Ed felt a level of detachment towards people in which he truly did not see people as people. So this is where I'm going to first and foremost say, now imagine it's not like I'm a passenger in the vehicle. I'm not in the passenger seat. I'm in the driver's seat, almost as if I'm a walk-in and I have inhabited that person's body. So I got a additional level of way in which Ed was sharing it with me, where I got insight into his mind and I could see the things that he was doing, but more so in which I could see the way in which he viewed those things on a mental level and the way in which he had experienced it on a personal level. So yes, I got to experience these things with a level of detachment, but that is because I was feeling it as Ed had felt it, which was everything that he had experienced in his life was with a level of detachment towards people, because he truly did not see people as people. They were like talking dolls to him. They were not sentient beings with families, friends, interests, their own hopes, dreams, emotions, companionship, none of that. They were like dolls to him. So do you guys remember back in like the maybe 70s or 80s, they used to make those creepy dolls where it was like a baby doll, but it had a string in it and you could pull the string and the doll would say a couple of things, that it had like a voice box in the doll that was activated when you would pull the string. So you'd pull the string and it would say some things. And then you'd pull the string again and it would say some other few things to you. This is the way in which Ed Kemper interacted with people, as if they were talking dolls, akin to those dolls that you may or may not have played with. You pulled a string and it would say some things. This is literally the way he viewed people. They were not sentient beings to him. They were talking dolls to him. And when he had unalived people, what had been shown to me through his experience was they were dolls that did not any longer work. So they were non-functioning dolls. It's like, imagine the doll that you pulled the string to get it to talk, the battery died, and you haven't replaced the battery. So you're pulling that string, but no matter how much you pull that string, that doll is not going to talk to you. That is the way in which he had viewed the people that he had unalived. They were non-functioning dolls. Because he did not, and I wrote this in big bold letters and I underlined it, he did not see them as people. And thus his action of unaliving them was through in a very, very detached kind of a emotion. Because he didn't necessarily, if he didn't see them as people, then he didn't necessarily see that he had unalived people. Now, this is also not to say that he did not intellectually understand that they were people. He didn't have like a break with reality. It's not like he had like a real mental disorder in which he didn't look at people and understand that they were people. He did. Intellectually, he understood that they were in fact people. He knew that they were people, but they were not people to him. He didn't experience them as people. He experienced them as dolls. Some of them were pretty dolls. Some of them were talkative dolls. Some of them were broken dolls. But they were always just dolls. And very few of the dolls that he had interacted with were pleasant. Now, interestingly enough, the only person that he saw as a person, and not just on an intellectual level, like, yes, I may not accept this person as a person, but I understand that they are in fact considered to be people. The only person that he actually considered to be an actual person was his mother. And that is because Edmund understood that he had come from somewhere. And because dolls don't reproduce, he knew that he had to have come from somewhere, so he came from his mother because his mother was a person. However, his mother was a highly dysfunctional person. Again, what had come in the 3D information was that his mother was incredibly critical towards Ed's father and had later said some things to Ed that when I was reading this, I was reeling. I was like, so one time, for example, she didn't know that Ed was overhearing a conversation in which she was talking to his dad. And like she had said to him, he's just like you. No one's ever gonna love him. And he doesn't deserve being loved. Like, horrifying. Imagine hearing that. Imagine like hearing your mother say that about you. Like, you don't deserve to be loved. No one's ever gonna love you. It's horrifying. It's horrific. So in case you're wondering if his mom actually also had some sort of undiagnosed mental disorder, it is hypothesized that she in fact had borderline personality disorder. Do we know for certain? No. Is that what is being hypothesized? Yes. So again, his mother was a highly dysfunctional person, and one in which Ed himself could not in fact even stand. She was not warm to him, not affectionate, but incredibly shrill, and she spoke altogether too much, and was also not a chaste woman. She was overtly sexual, even in front of Ed. So unfortunately for Ed, the first person that he saw as an actual, in fact, person was not a very good one, and was not a good example of a human being either. Now, Ed's mother and father had divorced when he was younger, and what was shown to me is that and that's one of the reasons he was actually sent to live with his paternal grandparents. But some of the time period, on and off, he did live with his mom. And in the period before his mother remarrying, she would have gentleman friends over and she wasn't getting paid to do it, but she would entertain them. And she would not be quiet or demure or try to conceal what she was doing, or would not engage in sexual activities with her male partners. She wouldn't wait until Ed wasn't home. She had no problem engaging in sexual activities with her male friends when Ed was home. And she was, again, not trying to conceal it. So he knew what was going on with his mom. So that's why he is saying she was not chaste. Not as in being chaste, as in a demure, ladylike kind of a person. Now, what was also shared with me through Ed's perspective was, because he was so unusually large and at 4 years old stood a full head above everybody else, and then later went on to grow to his full height, being just 1 inch shy of 7 feet. So from his perspective, because he was so unusually large, it actually took a lot of effort for him not to hurt somebody. So he really, in fact, had to moderate and temper. Like, he could not be rough and tumble with other people because he could really seriously hurt them. So there was always this level of separation between him and other people, even from the time that he was 4 years old. Now, what was some of the antisocial personality that he had exhibited at a young age was he had unalived 2 cats, and one of the cats that he had unalived was a family pet after he had seen the family pet showing preference to one of his sisters over him. So he had unalived it. In addition to that, he had unalived another cat. Then he had dismembered it. He had decapitated it, and he had put the cat's head on a stick. So this is someone that at a young age has no problem being cruel towards animals, both when they're alive as well as showing no level of respect to them once they're unalive. And always felt that separation between himself and other people, because on the one hand, he had a mother that never showed him affection and that never loved him and never even said to him that she loved him, because according to her, she thought if she told him she loved him, she was going to make him gay. So he had no affection from his mother. He was incredibly large and always had to refrain from being interactive with other people lest he hurt them. And because he was always incredibly large, he viewed people in a very distinct and separate sort of a way, where he was literally looking down on them. And because people were always so small to him, they were in fact doll-like to him. Now, this is separate from the psychological component in which he saw people literally as dolls. But even on a strictly 3-dimensional level, people were incredibly doll-like to him because he was so much larger than them. So he always had to be careful with them, like lest he hurt the dolls. But he never even saw people as people, he saw them as dolls. So physically they were dolls, mentally they were dolls. People were just dolls to him. So again, most of his experiences were lived physically, looking down at people, actually physically looking down at them. And yes, believe it or not, this actually can influence a person. If we are always looking down at somebody, it's going to influence the way in which it can, not guaranteed. It can influence the way in which another person perceives a person. Now, interestingly enough, I'm just going to pause here and I'm going to say that even if a person is influenced by looking down at another person, it's not necessarily a negative influence. It happened to have been in Ed's circumstance, but it hasn't been for everybody. Because I had done a reading on Elon Musk, which I will also link down below if you'd like to go back and view it. But the reading that I had done on Elon Musk was, in which I had shared the way his energy had come in, was, imagine, if you will, Elon Musk lived at the top of a mountain. So he had a higher vantage point looking at humanity. But it wasn't on a one-on-one interpersonal dynamic the way it was for Ed. It was more, again, because he was living at the top of a mountain. He had, let's say, that 360-degree view of everything that was going on around at the base of the mountain, at other points below him on the mountain. So he kind of had like this elevated vantage point that affect the entirety of humanity because he lived at the top of a mountain. So the way in which Elon's energy had been influenced by looking down on people was to get like a full 360-degree comprehensive overview of the way in which people lived and on a societal kind of a level. This is not so for Ed. Ed didn't have that top of the mountain view. He knew that where he stood in relations to other people, he towered over them. So one of the ways in which this manifested for Ed was a more negative way in which he looked down upon people. Because again, this is somebody that had no level of warmth or love or comfort or emotional empathy directed at him from his mother or shared by his mother. And then in later years, she was incredibly unchaste, and that left a very profound impact on him as well. His mother was shrill, she spoke entirely too much, and these two would argue like cats and dogs. So he really never had, and again, this is the only person he had seen actually, in fact, as a person. So he really didn't have any tools early on in life that was going to enable him to have any level of successful interaction with other people. But despite all of this, Ed was incredibly naturally intelligent. However, he was completely non-emotional and aloof. So think about it this way, kind of like Aquarian energy. But think about it like Aquarius energy in the 9th house. So he had a detached view overall of belief systems and higher education, higher concepts of learning. It was aloof, it was detached, but he actually could have a incredibly broad understanding of the way in which he saw big concepts. Not people, but concepts. Because look at it this way, Aquarius is kind of, if you will, the sign of the people. So the way in which he could understand people, again, not on an interpersonal level, but the way in which he could understand big concepts that affected people, because it's like Aquarius energy in the 9th house, that he actually had a really, really good grasp of and a really, really good understanding of. So he could see the big picture of how the world operated. But for him personally, it lacked meaning. And it lacked meaning because, again, I remind you, from his point of view, the world was run by walking, talking dolls. And 2% personal opinion, it's actually amazing that he did not develop an arrogance about him, because when I was engaging with his energy, there was no arrogance about him. And yes, I know that he was diagnosed with having narcissistic personality disorder, but when I was interacting with him, it was not like interacting with a narcissistic person. It definitely felt like I was interacting with a sociopath. It definitely felt like I was interacting with somebody that had schizotypal personality disorder. But there was no experience for me as I was in his energy, as I was experiencing the way he experienced the world. I actually did not get any hint of narcissism in him. But that's why I'm again sharing it as 2% personal opinion, because yes, he was diagnosed with having it. But yes, again, personally, from my point of view, it is amazing he did not develop an arrogance about him, because there was none when I was with him. Because he did not see himself as so-called better than other people, because from his point of view, they weren't people. They were dolls. And he did not view himself as better because from his point of view, he was alone in a world full of dolls, and the one person that was a person to him was his mother, and that's the person that he hated. The only time the world made sense to him was big picture. Again, 9th house energy. Aquarius in the 9th house. So it's anything that didn't have to do with people one-on-one on an interpersonal level, but more big picture, big societal. So anything that had to do with numbers, science, higher learning, philosophical concepts, things that would, like city planning, city development, things that were implemented to affect people on a big, broad scale and a big, broad scope, those were things that his mind could make sense of. Because again, wasn't people oriented, was big picture about the way the world would function oriented. So anything that was, if you will, big picture, but devoid of feelings, emotions, and personal interactions with other people, those were all good. However, behavior, emotions, relationships, they were shown to me as being as foreign to him as color, seeing color is to a blind person. If someone's blind and you try to explain to them the way colors look, they're not going to understand it. Just like you could try to explain to Ed emotions, relationships, how to interact with people, not going to get it either. They were words, but they were empty words to him. Now, it was at this point that Ed chose to share with me what the sensation of unaliving felt like to him right before as well as right after. So right before, it was shown to me as being chaotic. Incredibly chaotic. So I actually got, again, because he had invited me in, as if I was a walk-in, he invited me in to directly experience the way in which he had experienced the world. So just prior to him unaliving a person, this is the way it felt. Yes, it was chaotic, but it felt to me, experiencing it, like being drunk on a boat. And as if that's not bad enough, drunk and being on a boat, you're also drunk on a boat in a storm. So everything was incredibly topsy-turvy, wild, spinning. So you know sometimes if you drink too much and then like you lay down, I'm speaking anecdotally, because I haven't drank in years. But I've drank in the past, and yes, sometimes if you don't know better and you don't know to like hydrate before you go to sleep, and you've been drinking and you lay down, it's like, oh no, I best not lay down, because when you lay down, it's like suddenly everything starts to spin. And it's like, okay, I gotta close my eyes, but even when you close your eyes, you still feel like you're moving even though you're laying still. Exactly like that. Topsy-turvy, world spinning, everything around moving, shaking, noise, incredibly noisy, again, because it's like being on a boat in a storm. But instead of hearing thunder and seeing lightning and hearing the sound of the waves breaking on the boat and then hearing the boat creaking from nature and what is being done to the boat, it was like, imagine if you've ever heard white noise, but the white noise is turned so high up that it becomes not a pleasing sound, it's a distortion of the sound. So it was this terrible noise, and it was because the noise was actually being distorted, it was experienced as a profound ringing in his ears. So it's like he heard nothing, because again, it was a white noise was turned all the way up. So he heard nothing else. Everything else around him was like whitewashed by the noise in his ears, except for this intense ringing in his ears. So yes, incredibly chaotic. Like being drunk on a boat in a storm. And for him, the way that it felt was like he was going to die. And these times in which he had unalived women were right after he had had a really big and really profound fight with his mother, the only person he saw as a person. And he felt like he was going to die. Now, he did not share with me what the act was like for him to physically unalive a person. So he only shared with me the before and the after, not the during, to which I was incredibly grateful. Now, after he had unalived a person, it was the complete opposite of the prior. It was complete stillness, quiet, calm, peace, exhaustion, and then sleep. Post unaliving a person, it was like the world and everything in it had faded away. It was like being on a sinking ship, and then after the storm had passed and all the chaos passes with it, the calm waters. And it was shown to me that during those times, he himself had found stillness inside of himself. And it was the times in which he had felt stillness in a world that he personally did not really understand, and one in which he did not physically, mentally, emotionally, literally even fit in. So the world prior to unaliving a person felt like an earthquake where two parts of earth sidle up to one another and chafe, and that friction causes the earth to actually move and quake, and it's chaotic. But afterwards, those two parts of the earth are still and they seem to fit better with one another. So it was the periods thereafter in which he actually felt he fit better in with the world as well. So for him, the period prior to unaliving a person was a buildup of that feeling of not belonging, not fitting in, living in a world of dolls, and where all of those sensations were amplified. And it was a feeling of being out of sorts, not fitting in, and a crescendo that led to him unaliving somebody and then the stillness that followed. And then all was right in his world. He was right, the world was right, and he was at peace in the world. He was still, he was calm. Because he was in fact using the women that he had unalived as a way of, by proxy, unaliving his mother. Because that was actually the person that he wanted to unalive the whole time. And it was only after he had in fact unalived his mother, and then funnily enough her best friend, that was when he actually had stopped committing the crimes, and that was when he turned himself in. Because through the unaliving of other people, he was on an energetic level really just wanting to unalive his mother. And then at the time that he didn't have the energy, that pent-up energy in which he felt the need to unalive people. Now, this is a bit gnarly. Because he had engaged in necrophilia with the corpses, I'm also going to explain that by sharing. Again, necrophilia is having sexual engagements with a deceased person's body. This was shown to me as him doing it because, again, he didn't see people as people, he saw them as dolls. So these were just dolls that had malfunctioned and they weren't working any longer. So if that doll with the string that you pulled to get it to talk isn't working, does that mean that you can't play with the doll any longer? No. You can still play with it. You just can't get it to, talk with you, so to say. So he would actually engage with the doll, he would actually engage with the people's bodies at that time because, again, they were very doll-like to him. Now, he also did keep the severed heads of some of the victims for a slightly longer period of time in which he would first dispose of the body, but he would continue to keep the head. And when he had asked why he had done that, this is so interesting, this is so telling to me. The reason that he had decided to keep the heads for a period thereafter was he had said because that's what makes the person the person. So again, yes, he understood intellectually that these were people, but he said that's the eyes, that's the mouth, that's the brain, that's everything that makes the person, like on a mental level, right? Because obviously if the heart stops working, you don't have a alive functioning person. But from his point of view, because again, he doesn't understand the heart, he doesn't understand the emotions, he only understands big picture concepts. So for him, keeping the heads was, if you will, a way of trying to understand the world and understand his place in it as he related to other people, because he was keeping the foundation of what made a person the person. From his point of view, it was the brain, it was the mind, it was the part that understands big picture and not the things that understands the emotions, the heart. So I thought that was also incredibly interesting. Now, after Ed had shared with me the experience of what it was like where he felt after he had unalived a person, that calm, that stillness, the calm waters after the storm, it was at this point that he actually energetically tried to vanish. So it was, if you will, like in that stillness, he left me, and there was no amount of me trying to rouse him that would, in fact, rouse him energetically back to me. So it was kind of like, imagine somebody has like a weekend bender and they don't sleep for 36 or 48 hours straight. Imagine when they actually do come to go to sleep. Do you think you can just walk into the room and say, hey, yo, get up? And they're, no. Do you think you could even maybe touch them? And no, this is gonna need like a big ass motherfucking intervention to get that person to wake up because they're exhausted, they're depleted. So Ed was very much showing me that experience of what it was like to be energetically depleted, where thereafter I couldn't rouse him no matter what I did. But this too gave me additional insight into how this felt for him. After he had unalived a person, he needed stillness and quiet thereafter. And this is because it was one of the few times that he felt peace, and he did not want that peace to be disturbed. So he energetically shut down for a period thereafter. And it was only as I was writing this up that he actually had decided to come back into me. So I'm channeling all of this. He energetically withdrew from me. So I'm writing all of this up, and then only at the end of me writing everything that has happened prior till now up, sans the 3D information that came from his Wikipedia page, but all of the channeling. So it was only as I was writing up and concluding all of the channeling that I had done on him that then his energy had come back into me. So it was at this time that I had decided to ask him a few questions. So I asked him why he had unalived his mother, and he simply said, quote, "She was a bitch," end quote. I then asked him why he was cooperative with police and later on the FBI, wherein he had even agreed to help them in understanding people like him. And this is again 2% personal opinion, the answer that he had given me. I felt like he had kind of underplayed it. But I'm going to let you come to your own conclusions when I share with you what he had shared with me. So he had stated he was bored, and I think he was underplaying it, but he had said he was bored and he had all the time in the world once he was locked away, so why not? He did also share with me he enjoyed sharing a lot of what he did with the FBI so that he could see their reaction based on the things that he had shared. But it wasn't like he was sharing these things because he wanted to elicit some sort of a shocked response from them. It wasn't like he wanted to share the gory details of what he had done so these people would be thoroughly disgusted by him and they would go, "Oh, you monster, you." No, it wasn't like that. He was, again, because the way in which his mind worked was not with emotions, but with big picture understanding. So he would share things in the way that he understood why he behaved that he did and the way in which his mind worked and the way he worked. And that would then help illuminate other cases that they were working on. They had actually even gone to him to consult with him on cases they were working on to see if he could help them. So this is not where he was doing it to get some sort of a disgusted response from them. He was doing it because he liked to actually share things from his perspective and to see their reaction. Because when he would watch them, it was like he was seeing a light bulb going off in their minds, the FBI agents' minds. And to see how once he would share something with them, how they would get it in a way that they wouldn't have gotten it without his facilitating and without his helping them. And it was because of him that they were actually able to make a connection or to make sense of something in a way that they could not have made sense of prior to speaking with him. And he really liked that. He liked, for once, not being looked at like a freak because he was so tall. And he liked being looked at like he was a person. And isn't that ironic? That in a world full of people that he didn't see as people, but he saw as dolls, he liked actually being looked at and perceived as if he too was in fact a fellow person. Because he had for the entirety of his life felt separate and different. But this was actually the first time he felt integrated. And he had shared that the FBI agents that had come to speak with him and consult with him were less doll-like to him because he could see the bigger picture of what they were doing and how that made sense to him. Because again, this is not somebody that understands interpersonal dynamics one-on-one. He only understands big picture, big concepts. So the way in which the interactions he had with those FBI agents, although yes, they were one-on-one on an interpersonal level and on an interpersonal dynamic, it only really made sense to him because the way in which he was helping them and how he was talking to them was something that was going to help globally and big picture with all of humanity and not just that one person that he was interacting with. And because he was a part of this, not a part, not separate and distinct from, but a part of it as in being brought into the fold, being included. Because he was finally, for the first time in his life, actually included in something, his life suddenly didn't seem so empty and meaningless to him any longer. So Ed is actually a person that came into himself and came into his own only after he had been incarcerated. And it was only at that time that he could in fact be of service to humanity. It was through the sharing of information, sharing how he saw the world, and because he could lend that incredibly insightful and important information, he could in fact help law enforcement. So Ed Kemper is an example of how no life, no matter how horrific the actions that that person does while they are alive, no life is meaningless. And every soul has a purpose in being here. Ed Kemper's purpose just looked a little different. He is not somebody that contributed through medical advancements and finding cures for AIDS or cancer. He is not somebody that has had to contribute through technological advances. Right? He's not a person that made like the MRI machine or X-ray machines. He did not contribute getting us into the sky like the Wright brothers did. But Ed did in fact push evolution forward. Because of his mind and his participation with law enforcement, he actually helped build out the behavioral science unit at the FBI, which later went on to develop criminal profiling. Now, isn't that interesting? For somebody that had so much difficulty in relating to people on a one-on-one interpersonal dynamic, how did he actually help them? He helped them in understanding the way in which a criminal relates to their victims, because that is an interpersonal one-on-one relational dynamic. So for someone who had so much trouble and difficulty relating to people, he was incredibly helpful in providing information to the FBI in their understanding of how other people similar to an Ed Kemper view and come to interact and understand their own victims. Because crimes on an interpersonal dynamic are one-on-one. So this is where I remind you, there are no accidents when it comes to our soul's purpose in being here. We all have some sort of a soul purpose, even if our soul purpose is one in which we are doing the so-called dirty work for all of humanity. Because just as we ourselves have sanitation workers in the 3D, and those are the garbage men, not that they are garbage, men made out of garbage, they're the sanitation workers. They collect our garbage for us. But those men, just because they're doing the dirty work, they are no less than us for doing that work that nobody else wants to do. Because in fact, without them, the world would be a lot less clean and a lot less hygienic. And it is only because some people do this work that we can all live in a cleaner world. It's the same thing with Ed Kemper. He did some dirty work. Because it was only because he had done that dirty work that he could make a long-lasting and meaningful contribution to the FBI. So yes, it's only because some people do the dirty work that we can all live in a cleaner world. Same thing with soul contracts. Some souls agree to come in and to be the so-called sanitation workers because their soul has volunteered to do the grunt work or to do the dirty work so all of the rest of humanity can benefit from it. That was Ed Kemper on a soul level. So the next time we see the so-called crazy person or the person that we want to label a monster, how about this? Let's drop the label and instead ask ourselves, what did that person come to do for the rest of us? Or what did that person come to teach us? Or what grunt work did that soul agree to take on so that we could all live in a cleaner world? Because behind every 3D story is the soul and their mission and meaning and purpose in being here. So that concludes the reading that I have for you on Ed Kemper. I hope that you have found this video to be interesting and insightful, maybe even thought-provoking. I remind you to please take what resonates and to leave the rest behind. And as always, and until next time, stay in the high vibration.